Hi, my name is Mikaela Windle, and today we will be talking about trait inheritance and its variations. Traits are the characteristics that are inherited from parent organisms to the offspring. Some examples of traits are eye color, hair type, and if you have dimples or no dimples. But these certainly aren't all of them. Having traits makes each person who they are and different from everyone else. In other words, traits give us variation of how each one of us looks. We can see an example of varying traits in the picture on the right side of the screen. Here we see a group of children with some traits like others in the group, but not all of them, therefore making each child completely different from each other. For example, the girl in the front left and the girl in the blue shirt both have the trait for straight hair, but one has brown hair and the other is blonde. The study of the inheritance of traits and their variations in organisms is called genetics. Heredity is the process of passing traits from the parent organisms to the offspring. How this is done is DNA is given from both parent organisms to the offspring. On the DNA are genes, which code for what our traits will be. A common misconception students may have about this concept is they may think since the offspring is receiving traits from both parent organisms, then the traits will become an average of the parent's traits. This is incorrect because the traits will be either like one parent or the other. For example, if an offspring has both a tall parent and a short parent, the offspring will either be tall or short, not an average of the parent organism's height. Usually it takes multiple genes from the new DNA of the offspring working together to code for a specific trait. This is called a genotype. The phenotype is the actual display of the genotype as a physical trait. As we can see in the picture, for example, the genes for body height both call for tall, which is the genotype. So the offspring will be tall, which is the phenotype. Punnett squares are created and used to show the probability of the offspring having a particular form of a trait from the parent organisms. This is expressed through the use of alleles. Alleles are also expressed as either dominant or recessive. Dominant alleles code for a particular trait, and this trait is always expressed if the offspring has at least one dominant allele. So in our example, the dominant allele is the brown bee, and because it is a dominant allele, it will display the brown eye instead of the blue eye, which is recessive. Recessive alleles also code for a particular trait, but are only expressed if the offspring has two recessive alleles for the trait. So the other parent has two recessive alleles for blue eyes, so blue eyes will be displayed for that parent. What we can also see by looking at alleles is if a parent's alleles for a particular trait are homozygous or heterozygous. Homozygous is the term that's used when an allele pair have two of the same alleles for a particular trait. In our example, this would be the parent with the blue eyes because they have two recessive alleles which code for blue eyes. Heterozygous is the term used when an allele pair has two different alleles for a particular trait. In our example, this would be the parent with the brown eyes because they have one dominant allele and one recessive allele. To create a Punnett square, you must first create a grid of 4 boxes. You will place one parent at the top of the grid with one allele above one column and the other allele above the other column. The same will follow for the other parent, except their alleles will go on the side of the grid, and they'll have one allele next to the top row and one allele next to the bottom row. Then you will take the alleles from the parent at the top of the grid and shift them down into each box in the grid. And same will follow for the alleles on the side of the grid, except they will be shifting across, thus giving our probabilities of traits for offspring. To interpret Punnett squares, you need to look in the grid boxes to see what alleles were placed there. In this example, we see that there are two grid boxes that code for brown eyes because those grid boxes have a capital B and a lowercase b, which is a dominant allele and a recessive allele. We also see two grid boxes with all lowercase b's, which code for blue eyes. What we can infer from this Punnett square is that the offspring has a 50-50% chance of either having brown eyes or blue eyes. Another misconception students may have is about Punnett squares. Some students believe Punnett squares predict exactly what traits the offspring of parents will have. If one of these students were to see this example Punnett square, they would say something across the lines of, there are 4 boxes, so if these parents had 4 kids, there would be 2 kids with brown eyes and 2 kids with blue eyes. It is important to explain to students that Punnett squares do not predict the exact trait an offspring will have, but instead predicts the probability or chances the offspring has to display a particular trait. These are the resources I used to compile this information together. And these are the resources I used to find the pictures in the video. I also hope that you found this video not only insightful, but enjoyable as well.